Thank you for joining us in our bulletin tonight. Our sign language interpreter is William Silla. Now, as schools break for the August holidays, a section of teachers say the ban on corporal punishment should be lifted to curb cases of indiscipline that are on the rise.
This comes as days after a number of schools were forced to close early due to strikes or arson cases. Ian Wafula reports.
What you're seeing today is what we've been fearing most. That we might have a repeat of Kichanguli and the Bombolulu incidents, if you remember, some years back.
CAD Director Ndego Muhoro's sentiments were not far-fetched. In just less than a month, over a dozen schools in the country were closed prematurely. On the 3rd of August, the country would wake up to the news of an arson attack. 2 students lost their lives during the incident. Days later, 3 of their schoolmates were arraigned in court after evidence suggested they started the fire. A month before that, property worth thousands of shillings was destroyed in 2 separate incidents after dormitories in 2 schools in Kilifi County caught fire. The fires are reported to have started while students were in class. And in Bomet, a case of similar script, different cast. 4 schools were closed after the students either went on strike or touched down their school's facilities. But those are just but a few cases that have caught the headlines. Now, however, authorities say there is a growing concern of indiscipline cases in schools. A section of teachers believe institutions have become too lenient on matters discipline.
Serikali iweze kurudisha ile adhabu ambayo ilikuwa. Unajua wakati wetu tulikuwa tunapigwa 6 na wakati ile ya 6 ulikuwa unapewa, ukiwa mwanafunzi ulikuwa unaogopa kwa sababu ulikuwa unajua kwamba nikifika pale kwa mwalimu kama ni deputy ama principal akinipa ile 6 basi itakuwa shida kubwa.
The months of July and November are not too new to cases of arson and strikes within schools, with these trends being attributed to attempts to evade sitting for exams.
And that is the reason why we called a stakeholders forum to put our heads together to see exactly what is bedeviling in the education sector. Yes, and we looked at the many other reports in the past that have been submitted by committees appointed by government to investigate and come up with the solutions and the way forward on issues.
But there is more. Alcohol and drug abuse in schools too has been a constant challenge to administrators. Last week, over 40 students were allegedly arrested for being drunk, in possession of bang and engaging in sexual acts in a bus on their way home. Parents and teachers have been on the spotlight for failing to instill discipline on the children. However, both quarters seem to be tossing this responsibility to each other.
Upande wa wazazi kuna ulegevu fulani. Kwa mfano wazazi wakati mwingine napoitwa kama ni pale shule kwa sababu ya discipline cases, unapata mtoto kwa sababu ya ile overprotection kwa mtoto anaenda hata anamtetesha mwalimu mbele ya mwanafunzi. Kwa hivyo mimi sioni wakati ama siku ambayo itafika yule mwanafunzi aweze kumpa mwalimu wake heshima.
When a child gets to an age of listening, that child has the ability to pick up what is good and what is bad, if they are not properly guided by their parents, if they have entered into long association of their age mates, they will, of course, one way or the other, go off course. That means they will go away from the line.
The church too is concerned by this growing trend. Reverend Joseph Ntombura of the Methodist Church of Kenya says forums should be put in place to find solutions to curb indiscipline in schools.
The church is very concerned. Like in down here at the coast, the Methodist is sponsoring the schools. 3 of them have been banned. And this is very serious as far as we are concerned, because we are expectant to set examples.
And while he called on dialogue, Ntombura also said that joint efforts by both the parents and teachers are crucial in a student's path to maturity. Ian Wafula, KTN News.
Let's take you to Nakuru Central Division, where the security officers attended a crisis meeting today following the arrest of 5 police officers this weekend for allegedly engaging in crime. Now, there have been claims in that county recently that law enforcers are behind the surging wave of robberies in the town. And now, OCPD Bernard Kioko wants all officers to return their arms to the armory at the end of their shifts. Last night, 3 armed officers from Nakuru were arrested in Kericho after they reportedly abducted a motorist. The 3 are said to have carjacked the motorist and demanded a ransom of 2 million shillings from him before officers from Kericho who were monitoring them pounced and cut their mission short on Friday. The OCPD put 2 police constables under arrest after they allegedly colluded with a suspect to share stolen goods and released him. A 3rd officer has not been arrested. Last month, CID officers in Nakuru arrested traffic police officer Peter Gashie Matiru after he was linked to a highway theft of property worth 70 million shillings. Matiru is facing 3 counts of robbery with violence. He was arrested together with his brother Eliud Waititu and wife Elizabeth Wamboi. Still in July, Nakuru GK Prison Constable Gerald Munyao and Faith Chepkonga Chebi was sentenced to 10 years each in prison for robbery with violence and possession of stolen goods.
President Uhuru Kenyatta is tomorrow scheduled to address the Ugandan Parliament. The President, who is on a 3-day state visit to Uganda earlier this evening, met with the Ugandan business community and Kenyans living in Uganda as his visit entered its 2nd day.
Pleasure. Thank you, President.
After a busy first day of his Ugandan state visit, Day 2 saw President Uhuru Kenyatta visit a pharmaceutical manufacturing plant in Kampala. The President was conducted on a tour of the Cipla quality chemical industry.
For example, the pasta less by 1 cup. This system should be able to detect. Yes. That means 1 less. So it's an automated checker of the manual checking.
The state-of-the-art manufacturing plant is one of the biggest on the continent, specializing in the manufacture of antiretroviral and malaria drugs.
Another product for hepatitis B treatment, and we are the first in Africa to manufacture this. Yes, again being launched today evening.
The President this evening addressed the Ugandan business community and met Kenyans living in Uganda. He is scheduled to address the Ugandan Parliament on Monday.
President Uhuru Kenyatta of Kenya. So please make inquiry. I am surprised that the members acting under one rule.
He is also due to meet with his Ugandan counterpart Yoweri Museveni and the Ethiopian Prime Minister under the umbrella of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development IGAD to discuss developments in the South Sudan peace talks. Uhuru is the IGAD rapporteur on South Sudan. Uhuru Kenyatta began his 3-day visit to Uganda on Saturday afternoon. The President and his delegation held bilateral talks with Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni and members of the Ugandan cabinet. The talks centered around integration, trade, agriculture, tourism and health.
We have worked hand in hand, not only just to bring prosperity to our people, but also to ensure and work together to bring stability in our region.
His host, Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni, on Saturday night hosted a state dinner in his honor at State House, Uganda. It is the first state visit by President Uhuru Kenyatta to Uganda. Rita Tinina, KTN News.
An important trip there for President Uhuru Kenyatta, Kenya's and Uganda's economy. So this is quite unprecedented. He'll be attending Parliament tomorrow, which will be live, by the way, on KTN News.
Most unprecedented. There's lots of politics in the region that they're going to be able to discuss. Uhuru Kenyatta and Yoweri Museveni, what's happening in Burundi, what's happening in South Sudan, both of them playing key roles. But of course, the relationship between Uganda and Kenya is one that has been long-standing and very, very fruitful. Let's start with this figure here. This is from 2013. 67 billion shillings worth of trade. This is exports from Kenya to Uganda. Now remember, Kenya has quite a number of companies that are that have stations in Uganda or have branches in Uganda. Lots of banks as well as supermarket chains. Uchumi, Nakumatt is there as well. Lots of other people doing smaller trade. That accounts for that. But of course, Uganda's balance of trade with Kenya isn't quite as large. It's about 15 billion, as you'll see on the next slide. 15 billion shillings worth of trade. Now in the same year, no less, 15 billion shillings worth of trade coming from Uganda as exports from Uganda into Kenya. The balance of trade there being about 83 billion shillings, heavily in favor of Kenya. Of course, Uganda has been one of Kenya's largest trading partners in the East African region, one of its largest trading partners of all trading partners outside of the European Union, except for 2014. Now, something very significant happened in that year. Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania have had a very difficult trade relationship for a long time, but in 2014, with a number of protocols having been signed, trade restrictions were lifted, especially trade restrictions between Tanzania, Kenya and Uganda, and that made Tanzania the biggest trading partner with Kenya in the East African region since this year, 2014. That was a significant year in the fact that Uganda slipped back to second position, but also because we're starting to get access to this country to our south and to other countries south of Tanzania's southernmost border. But Uganda still maintains an extremely important relationship with Kenya. It is Kenya's 7th largest trading partner. 7th largest trading partner, second largest of course in the EAC, but there are quite a number of infrastructure developments between Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, not so much with Tanzania though, even though the trade, the balance of trade reflects differently, not so much with Tanzania. Of course, the biggest one right now is a standard gauge railway that's going to pass between Kenya, Uganda and Kigali. Loads and loads of investment going in there in terms of the levies that have been placed at the port of all goods passing through Kenya, all goods passing through the Mombasa port have about 1.5% of a levy placed on them in order to raise money for this. And this is going to be able to open up a corridor of trade that has been existent but is slowed down because right now it's mostly done by road. There have also been some suggestions that along this same corridor a road also be built, but those are still in very preliminary stages. Another big infrastructure investment between Kenya, Uganda and this time South Sudan, another East African partner, is the Lapset oil pipeline. That of course was going to be running through from Kenya to Uganda as well as South Sudan. And interesting fact here, our last slide of the evening. Apart from the fact that Toyota Shuho, this is a parent company that of Toyota that has been contracted to build this pipeline. The pipeline itself is a story, and once it's done, it's going to run for 1,380 kilometers. Now, it's pretty long, and we know the distances between all our countries here. This is the length of this heated oil pipeline. But the reason why it's going to be pretty big news outside of the economic benefits that it'll have for these three countries is it's going to be the longest heated pipeline in the world, not just East Africa, not Africa, but in the world, definitely changing the fortunes of trade between Kenya, Uganda and South Sudan. That of course being held back by the fact that there's a lot of violence in South Sudan. And remember, the pipeline, the oil from Uganda, from Kenya, from South Sudan, there are plans to build a refinery in Lamu at the Lamu port to be able to refine that. That would benefit Kenya quite a bit in terms of tax dollars and tax shillings from South Sudan and Kenya. That relationship, a long-standing one, part of the reason why Uhuru Kenyatta is going to be addressing Parliament in Uganda, first time ever for a Kenyan president or any president for that matter to do this. And to speak to us right now with respect to that is Godpa Tumushabe. He's a political analyst joining us on Skype from Kampala. Thank you very much for joining us, Godpa. Let's start with the significance of the visit of Uhuru Kenyatta. How significant is it to the people, aside from the politics of it, how significant is it to the people of Uganda that Uhuru Kenyatta is visiting at this time?
No, first of all, I would say this is actually significant in the sense that the Uganda and Kenya really share historical relationships. The citizens of the two countries are known to share a lot compared to many others within the East African community. But also actually there are stories that Uhuru Kenyatta is known to be actually a Ugandan, the way Obama is known to be Kenyan. So we also know Uhuru Kenyatta as having descendants in Bunyoro. So really, Uhuru coming to Uganda is something that resonates well.
Claiming ownership of Uhuru Kenyatta, that's something that we've heard before in Kenya. A lot of people laugh about that, but it is something that is spun in the Ugandan public and something that seems to have gained traction. But let's speak about the political significance of Uhuru Kenyatta's visit. Of course, there's an election coming in Uganda, and the close relationship between Uhuru Kenyatta and Yoweri Museveni cannot be gainsaid. Is this being interpreted, at least politically, as Yoweri Museveni using the goodwill that Uhuru Kenyatta has with Ugandan people to gain perhaps some points ahead of an election that seems to be one that will be very tightly contested between Amama Mbabazi and Kizza Besigye?
I actually don't think that you can say for certain that there is that Uhuru has a lot of goodwill in Uganda. On the contrary, Ugandans really, I think that you see a very sharp contrast between Uganda and Kenya in terms of the politics, in terms of democracy, and between Uhuru as the president and President Museveni in Uganda. In terms of the democratization process, Ugandans see Kenya as a country that is democratizing from the time the new constitution was adopted. Kenya has been systematically moving on the course of democratization, deepening systems of accountability. While in the case of Uganda, from the time we adopted the 1995 constitution, the regime here has been basically rewriting the rules, and you can easily say that democracy is actually receding. So they are fairly sharp contrasts. Secondly, Secondly,
go ahead, yes.
There is a sharp contrast between Uhuru and Museveni, because Uhuru is this new generation of African leaders, the young people, the coziness with the young people, and of course, President Museveni is more of a strong man in the generation of the Dos Santoses, the Mugabes, the Obiang Nguemas. So there is a fairly sharp contrast. So I don't think that Ugandans would be looking at this in terms of goodwill, but more so in terms of President Museveni actually has done this time and again when there are elections. Bringing in a number of foreign leaders to really show up his credentials.
Yeah, then perhaps anecdotally at least this would work in favor of Kizza Besigye and Amama Mbabazi if Uhuru Kenyatta is the counterpoint to what Yoweri Museveni is, at least politically. If people can see this contrast, would that work then in favor of the opposition?
No. You see, if Uhuru Kenyatta was had the strength and the courage to speak truth to power, the way Obama talked when he was in Kenya or the African Union, I'm sure that Uhuru Kenyatta would stand before that parliament of Uganda and say, the parliament can redefine the direction of this country in terms of the democratization process. There are democratic reforms, there are constitutional reforms that have stalled in the parliament because the regime does not want to reform. Does Uhuru have the courage to be able to speak to that parliament and say the people of Uganda have demanded for these reforms, so you can go ahead and do them? I don't think that he can, because what you have in this East African community now is more of a club of comrades, not leaders that are accountable.
There's no expectation, though, then that Uhuru Kenyatta would speak to the political situation in Uganda?
I doubt that he can do it, and I think the leaders here, they don't want to actually annoy each other, they don't want to harm each other, so they keep on hiding away from the truth. And therefore, you'll see them really dealing more with these projects you've mentioned, the infrastructure projects. But you know, countries are not just about building roads and bridges and dams. They are about building institutions that are able to sustain democratic processes and bring about prosperity.
All right. That being said, though, there are quite a number of relationships between Kenya and Uganda infrastructurally, with building roads, building dams, brick and mortar. And one of those is LAPSET. With respect to the building of that pipeline, the agreement around refining of Ugandan oil in Kenya, is this being received well within government circles, perhaps because of the expectation that Kenya is going to benefit quite a bit from Ugandan oil, with Uganda not benefiting as much, considering the kind of contracts it entered into and the time that profit oil will be reaped from the ground in Uganda?
No, I would say that any initiatives that bring the two countries together in terms of economic prosperity and opportunities, I think they should be welcomed. And therefore, I think that this major pipeline project is really a welcome idea. The difference between Uganda and Kenya is that Kenya is always organized and prepared to take advantage of these kinds of opportunities. While Uganda, we always try and pretend that we are doing very serious things, but when it comes to shove, then you realize that actually we are never prepared to be able to take advantage of these opportunities. I think that is really a major difference, and we've seen it in many areas, even in South Sudan where we fought a war. You find Kenyan businesses and industries are moving in big time. In Uganda, we are just moving small things and selling pineapples and cabbages and matoke and the like. So there is a very serious, a very stark difference between how the Kenya government works and looks at opportunities and how the Ugandan government responds.
All right. Pineapples and matoke notwithstanding, thank you very much for joining us. Godpa Tumusabe from Uganda. We will be speaking, of course, again about that visit, especially after that address to the Ugandan people from Uganda's parliament, unprecedented, and perhaps the expectation that Godpa talks about with respect to what Uhuru Kenyatta might not say is one that is the unsaid. I think is the one is something that's carrying the day quite a bit with respect to whether he can be the big brother, so to speak, and speak to the democratization process in Uganda. Very interesting that he'd be the one to be picked to do that.
Yes, and he will be addressing Parliament full of politicians. So let's see whether politics comes into play. And if you're a Kenyan living in Uganda, you're Ugandan, and you are watching us from around the region, please do share your thoughts with us on this unprecedented trip by President Uhuru Kenyatta to Uganda. We will be live with that tomorrow all morning on KTN News, so do stay with us for more on that. Politics and trade will be the focus of the discussion, but we'd like to move on to other stories of the day now. Proposals have been made to transform the Kenyan military into a more powerful and independent force. The Kenya Defence Forces Amendment Bill is currently before the National Assembly. Should it pass, then the KDF will acquire sweeping powers and financial independence, as KTN's Aaron Acheng now reports.
Kenya may see drastic changes in the military and governing structures that will see a more powerful and independent military if MPs adopt an amendment to the law that gives the military sweeping powers and financial independence, as well as drastically limiting the role of Defense Cabinet Secretary. The Kenya Defence Forces Amendment Bill 2015, currently before the National Assembly, seeks to give the military enhanced financial autonomy by providing its independent vote away from the ministry, appropriated by the National Assembly, and which shall not be audited by the Auditor General.
I think the CS should be able to exercise oversight over the military. In all democracies worldwide, the civilian oversight is always necessary to maintain balance in a democracy. And that balance has to be maintained. Even when we are growing our democracy, this is not the time to interfere with that balance.
Critics to the bill say the proposed law is not just a horrendous piece, but an attempt to overthrow the constitution and democratic state, as it provides room for siphoning of public funds and must be rejected on arrival.
So if you shield any part of the government from oversight by Parliament, you are giving a license to rob the country. And to that extent, that should not be acceptable to the Republic.
Currently, the law provides that the funds to the Kenya Defence Forces shall be in a separate vote under the Defence Ministry. The bill seeks to remove the role of Parliament in assigning the Cabinet Secretary defence functions. It removes the requirement for the CS to report to the President and Parliament on compliance with the policies and directions.
We will ensure that the KDF Amendment Bill speaks to the deficiencies within the KDF, speaks to the deficiencies within the military system in this republic, and also speaks to the deficiencies that would seek to undermine the security of the people of the republic.
This essentially reduces the role of the Cabinet Secretary to periphery ceremonial at best, and substantially increases the powers of the Chief of Defence Forces, even as it provides avenues if any, for scrapping the ministry, because the defense forces will then be required to report directly to the President and Parliament if MPs enact the bill.
I wouldn't imagine that anyone would want to give KDF roles that are not specified in the Constitution. In any case, if you are tempted to make, we have seen it before, if you've tempted to make a law which contravenes the Constitution, it is faulty ab initio. So really, I think the best thing is to wait for that bill to come to Parliament.
But Parliament, Defense and Foreign Affairs Chairman Ndungu Githinji has lashed out at political leaders opposing the bill, saying they are commenting on imaginations since the bill is yet to be committed to the floor of the National Assembly.
Standing orders prevent us from preempting debate and discussing the contents. We are yet even to formally receive it as a committee, and I am sure once we do, we will, the members of the Committee of Defense and Foreign Relations are astute leaders in their own right, and they will pay due attention to all considerations.
However, other lawmakers say they will consider public sensitivity over the bill before passing or rejecting it. Aaron Ocheng, KTN News.
To another story now. One of the reasons that nurses cite for frequent strikes is low housing allowance. While not much has been done about their cries for pay hikes, the National Nurses of Kenya Association of Kenya is now attempting to provide an answer for better and affordable housing for the nurses. KTN's Sharon Momanyi now reports.
Elizabeth Kibunja is a nurse at the Thika Level 5 hospital in Kiambu County. She loves her job, she says, but it is one that has over time been marred with challenges. And she says that it is especially so for nurses working in public hospitals.
Government actually has no enough houses. Even those houses that are there in the hospital, they are also, people are also paying. There's no free houses in the hospital. Yeah. And this house allowance is given per job group. It depends on your job group that the salary you are given. And you find that salary is not enough.
It is a cry that is resounded by her colleagues, and one that has seen them putting down the foundation of a long-term solution: the construction of houses for the nurses.
Why should nurses go on strike? And the few things is they'll go on strike is because, one, they are not paid better. But pay will never be enough, money will not be enough. So what we have been trying to check with the government, if you check on the last financial year, then you find that they had allocated like 1.2 billion. That was for nursing housing. But that money was not given to the nurses. It went to the counties and nurses never got to the housing.
It is a project by the National Nurses Association of Kenya, who got into partnerships with investors to see the construction of their units named Nurses Gardens. At the moment, nurses working in public hospitals get house allowance depending on their job groups, but the nurses want a different system introduced altogether.
What we are trying to do is practical means as an association, that where we come in and we say, can we procure a project? And this one we have done through an investment company, and every nurse that is interested comes in. We assist. So that now by the time we are going to the government, because what now we are agitating the government to do is, can the government now come in and give nurses houses, and then instead of the house allowance, that will ensure that nurses live in comfortably, nurses can go to work.
Let the government support the call by the nurses on this side today, that give nurses housing mortgage, so that the nurses own houses. When they own houses, the peanuts you are giving them will be taken somewhere else.
Calling on the support of the government, the nurses count the benefits of the project, which include a safer life of better quality. Sharon Momanyi, KTN News.
All right, now this is a figure that continues to dominate conversations in the country, and it's following the Auditor General's report about amounts of money that he says were unaccounted for spending, and we will be speaking to him about that. We'll also be addressing some of the issues that have come up. There's that hashtag that's trending on Twitter at the moment, but he will be talking to us about the procedure that he went through. Did he get the right papers and documents in time? So keep your comments coming in on that.
And of course the inference that 67 billion shillings missing means that it's 67 billion shillings that was stolen. It'll be very interesting to hear what his point of view
Yeah, the
is
great
on
words
same.
that have come out: stolen, looted, misappropriated, misused, missing, unaccounted for. So he will be breaking that down for us so we can have a clear understanding of that report. At KTN News, at John Alanamo, and at Yvonne Okwara. Keep them coming. Up ahead on Checkpoint, is it a smear campaign or valid reactions? One-on-one with the Auditor General. We're looking out for your feedback on Checkpoint. The SMS number is 22155. You can tweet us. The hashtag we're using at KTN News is Checkpoint. Your questions and comments for the Auditor General's report, and that is who we're hosting on this edition of Checkpoint, Mr. Edward Oko, who's the Auditor General of the country. Thank you for making the time to be with us tonight. Quite a, furore and a storm over your report. Let's start by talking about the process of it. Were you able to get all the documentation you required in time to prepare your report as constituted by law?
Let me answer to that by outlining what the process is. As you know, the government fiscal year runs from July to 30th. So basically, the reports are first of all prepared through an integrated financial management system which monitors every payment which goes through the system, and each payment which goes through what the system we call IFMIS must have a voucher, must be created and must be supported. So throughout the year these payments are going on and throughout. So come 30th June the system closes and we rewind the clock and start again 1st of July. At that time, at that stage, the Constitution requires that there should be now accounts prepared by all the ministries, departments and agencies as at 30th June. Now ordinarily the Constitution gives the MDAs up to 30th September to prepare the accounts. So after 30th September, when these reports are given to me, it's when I officially give what we call memorandum of understanding that we are coming in to audit.
Okay.
And we will therefore be there for about 2 months. Within the memorandum of understanding, we ask for what we call entrance meeting with those concerned. So we normally hold entrance meeting with the audit staff. So during the next 2 months after 30th September, we have a lot of, we are in the premises, we have a lot of back and forth with the auditees. At some point during that 2 months, the situation has to stop. We raise certain queries during the contacts. Some are resolved. Some may not be resolved to our satisfaction. We then raise what you call a draft management query or draft management letter to the minister, which is then responded to, and we take that into account before we have what you call final exit meeting with the management, and after that I then prepare my report. But let me say this report, we prepare each report for each ministry. What we are talking about is a consolidation of all the ministries. So the ministries have had this report well before I came out with this particular, what we call the blue book. That's the consolidated accounts.
So were you given the documents that you required in that period during the audit process to enable you give your opinion on government expenditure for the financial year 2013-2014?
By and large, the documents are there, but there are cases where we were not given what we call adequately supporting documentation or adequately satisfactory explanations, which we then highlight, because those ones were not resolved to our satisfaction.
Okay.
So these are the ones which come into the report. Now, when I report or opine or give an opinion on the statement, the opinions are basically this, that you presented me a set of accounts which I can trace and agree with the underlying records, like if it is IFMIS, I can say that this figure agrees with the underlying records.
Okay.
That's one.
All right.
You presented me with those figures. When I check with supporting documentation, the vouchers, they're there. Those figures, because the figures I've got both sides of in terms of accounting, they are reconciling. Issues like the bank accounts, that what your bank balance or what you have in cash is reconciled with the books.
Okay.
So what comes out is that I have to opine on that basis. Where I feel by and large things are okay. In other words, those books or those accounts which are presented to me agree with the books of accounts, I give what you call a true and fair opinion.
Okay.
So that's what you call unqualified report. What is a clean report?
Okay.
There could be cases where there could be, by and large, the reports are there, the records are there, but there are certain amounts which I'm unhappy with. So I would say that except for this amount, I'm largely okay with the accounts, true and fair. Then there is the other third category, whereby the books, the records are there, the amounts are there, but there are so many material differences that I cannot give. I basically say these statements or these accounts do not give a true and fair view.
Okay.
Then there is the worst case. The worst case basically is a breakdown. In other words, there is no link from the underlying record with the figures which you have presented to me. There is absolutely no link. So there is really a very difficult, there is no basis upon which I can even opine on the accounts, and that's serious.
All right, and that is the serious case. And we'll get into a little bit of more definition in just a moment from now. But I want you to take a look at, there's been quite some reaction from your reports. And this is the Principal Secretary in the Ministry of Devolution, and this is what he said, that they responded to all the queries that were raised by your letter dated April 29th. They say they responded on May the 4th. It goes on to say in part that you did not take their responses into account at all in the final report. I think the National Treasury also said documents were available to you, but you did not use them, even going as far as to pay for space in local media to respond to your report. Is this the case? Were there some cases where you were given all the queries that were raised, there were responses, but you did not use them? In some cases you did? Can you respond to those?
Where we have been given adequate supporting document which responds to the figures we are talking about. Mind you, you can provide documents, but do they respond to the figures? That's one. Where we've been given that, surely we are professional. We have very qualified Kenyans. Most of them have been auditing this ministry for years, even before I got into that office, so they know. So if the supporting documentation have been given which are adequate, there's no reason why somebody would ignore them. But what happens so often is that these queries or these responses come very late when we are almost finalizing, which indicates that some of the people who are critical in the process, who should be responsible, are not have not taken the audit seriously, or have not been in the meetings, or meetings have been delegated to lower staff. So when the report come out at their level, when we have more or less finalized, it's when everybody gets to work.
Do you take those into account?
Well, I do take them into account, but let me tell you, when I take them, you can respond. Some of the responses are 4 pages, 5 pages, but they are responding, trying to explain, not changing the facts. Do you understand? If the figures didn't agree, it would be, look, it didn't agree maybe because of this and this and this, but the books didn't agree. So those facts don't change. Because some of the explanation, when they give you, it's given to say, look, okay, don't then mention it in your report. But
is that the case that happened?
This
Some of the
that's
responses you were
what
given?
no, they don't say don't mention, but they are trying to explain, and they are expecting, because they've explained, it should not be in the report. I'm reporting on figures. The figures as at 30th June. At that 30th June, there were disagreement, or there were differences. You have provided me with some explanation. I said it is not adequate in my view. So you think because you provided those explanations, the issue is stopped. It's not that.
Okay. So
but
you
the other way,
did
let me just
not adequate?
They are not adequate.
saying?
Certainly, they are not satisfactory.
All right.
But let me explain a bit more about, because then the next situation they say, oh, they talk of international standards requires that you should include our explanation. The international standards do not say that.
What do they say?
The international standards will say, yes, you take into account, but you, my opinion is my professional opinion. I give professional opinion. Now, the imagination of people is that this report, once I've given you the ministry report, I should then append those. That's what I think they mean.
Those explanations.
Those explanations.
All right.
Which is impractical. It cannot happen.
All right, let's talk about the international auditing standards for a moment, because the Treasury's response to your report was that you did not hold exit meetings or final audit review meetings as per those standards. Is that the case?
I don't think there could have been some exceptions, but by and large we try and hold exit meetings. The only situation is that the people who attend, when we hold them at the lower, are delegated people. Those who are now talking do not attend.
All right. But did you hold exit meetings in all instances?
In most cases, you hold exit meetings.
All right, okay. I'd like us to listen to Majority Leader Aden Duale, who spoke about the report. And in this first clip that we're going to play for you, let's listen to his reaction a couple of days ago to the Auditor General's report.
And the Auditor General should also care about the image of his office. The Auditor General last year, 2012-2013 accounts ya national government alisema 300 billion shillings was lost. Wote mnajua, mliona kwa gazeti. Wakati hiyo accounts iliangaliwa na Public Accounts Committee led by Ababu na Mwamba then, bunge ikaleta report kusema hakuna shilingi ilipotea. Wewe ulisema 300 billion was lost. When it came to parliament, there was no shilling lost. So who is lying between the Auditor General's office and the Public Accounts Committee of the National Assembly?
The question we'd like to pose to you now. Your reaction to that?
My reaction to that is that, as I've told you, my constitutional duty is to give an opinion on the accounts which are presented for me to audit. And my opinions are exactly what I told you. I've said, I've looked at these accounts, they do not give a true and fair view. There is nowhere in my reporting that I say so much has been lost, unless it is clearly been found through the course of the audit. When I'm opining on the accounts as a whole, I'm giving my opinion. I never mention the word lost. So I think the leader of the majority is taking the amounts which I said out of context. And in fact, in the previous year, what I said, if you looked at the statements which I had disclaimed opinion, when you look at the assets and liabilities were involved in those statements, they added up to almost that amount. All right? So this is what is talking about. This does not say, the report do not say that 300 billion has been lost. I think this is his own words.
Okay, let's talk about unaccounted for, lost, looted, misappropriated, misused. In your view, if you cannot account for spending, and you know, in your report you talked about some disturbing, you know, methods in the government's accounting system, does it equal corruption?
Let me tell you this. You know, when we approve a budget, the budget is approved by Parliament, and this budget comes into force on the 1st of July. This budget is like a line of credit given by Kenyans to each ministry, which means that as they go throughout the year, they draw down the money. When you draw down the money on a line of credit, you either buy a chair, buy an asset, buy a building, and we can see.
Okay.
You either then pay the staff, we can see the stuff. You then spend it otherwise, another expenditure, which then I ask you, give me the documentation. When the balance comes, you then reconcile with the amount you drew from the bank.
Right.
So when there are differences, so my work is to tell you that this money which was drawn by this ministry, so much I didn't get adequate, either I didn't see the asset, or it was not adequately accounted for, meaning that no explanation or justification or documentation to my satisfaction was given to me.
All right.
Or simply where then we can establish cash has been lost, we would actually say that.
All right.
But that's the rare case where we say
Okay.
that.
Do you think, though, to my question, do you think misappropriation, misuse, or unaccountability, which is what your office is very keen on doing, saying you were given 100 shillings to buy a pint of milk,
Yes.
I do not see a receipt for the pint of milk,
right.
very simply put. Do you think unaccountability is a form of corruption? Is it the start of corruption? And how, in other words, what I'm trying to ask is how important is accountability in the war on corruption?
I think accountability is very important. As I said, this is a line of credit given to you. Like when you go to the bank, you take 10,000. 10,000, if we expect you to account for it to the dot. So if you don't account for it to the dot, then there must have been something missing. There must have been some abuse.
Okay.
So this abuse, how you interpret it, is up to you.
All right, so you're not going to use the word corruption when it comes to unaccountability, do you think? Because a lot of Kenyans are concerned about that. 67 billion, not to mention the $2 billion of the sovereign fund that's in an offshore account rather than in the consolidated fund.
When I audit, I look, because as you know, the use of your budget and your resources are controlled by the approvals and compliances. There are issues which you must comply with. The way you use the money must be complying with some laws, some Public Finance Management Act, which I look for. And I check compliance with those laws. I look at whether they've been used properly or there's value for money to the extent possible. So this is what I check. Now, corruption is something which is up to the beholder's eye. They have to now read it from that aspect.
All right. Are you surprised by the political furore that's been caused by your report? The Auditor General, the Majority Leader is weighing heavily on this. The National Treasury is doing this. Members of Parliament are, divided, both sides, by that. Are you surprised by this? There's a trending hashtag on Twitter,
Yes.
Who audits the Auditor General,
Right.
at this moment. Are you surprised by this reaction?
Well, I'm surprised because I think we've been the government is being audited. It's been audited each year. I'm not the first Auditor General to audit the government, and I think if you look at the past, there were issues like this coming up. Why this year? I'm just a bit surprised that this year is an exception.
Okay, so this year is an exception. You are on record as saying that your life and those of members of your staff are in danger. You've been receiving death threats. Do you want to talk about that?
I think these are matters which are in the hands of the police, which I would like not to talk in detail, but only to affirm that yes, we have been receiving some threatening SMSs from which we have handed over to the police. So it's being investigated. And I think the Inspector General Police has assured me that they're taking the matter seriously and they're acting. So they're still working on that.
Who do you think is behind the threats? Do you know?
God knows.
Do you have any
I still have to wait for the Inspector General's police.
I'd like us to talk
report.
about that because the Public Audit Bill is one of those issues, and there's been allegations that the executive is out to stifle the work of your office by changing the law so that hiring and firing of your own staff has now been moved from you to the Public Service Commission. Do you think that in any way undermines the independence of your office?
You know, the independence must be looked at. There's independence of operation, there's independence of reporting and so forth, but there is also the financial independence. Those taken together brings the independence into context. Now, when we did the first draft of the bill, some of those issues were in it. And some of the issues which later on came back were in it, and it went through public participation, it went through parliament, it went through one. So what surprised me was that certain of those original issues, like issues of the Public Service Commission coming into my recruitment, whereas the Constitution gives me that right. Issues about the way my budget is determined, coming back to from where it was, we were hoping it would be agreed that my budget should be one which is we had proposed to be a tripartite discussion prior to the budget between the chair of the budget committee, the CS, and myself, to agree on a figure which then is included in the budget policy statement, which is the statement of which goes on to the parliament for approval. That one, it's again changed to say that the treasury will review and decide on the budget. That was a major shift again from what we felt was agreed. There is also another one after the budget, after the act, the bill, that treasury were to give me the regulations, were to devise the regulation to how I will implement that bill. That's not proper. There were also other issues like that the auditor cannot question policy. And as you know, Yvonne, the auditing now is beyond figures. Auditing now requires that the Auditor General, and these are under the standards of international standards, must go beyond and ask certain issues about value for money, certain issues about effectiveness, efficiency, and cost effectiveness with which the resources are used. So there are some audits which we do which respond to that, and necessarily if
so
you're going to do
about facts and figures, but also value for money,
efficiency, and once you go to do such audits, policy issues become to be very critical. Now, if you say you cannot question policy, then basically you are saying your auditor cannot give you that additional assurance about performance, about value for money.
So with all of this happening, do you believe the executive has the best interests of the Auditor General's office at heart? Or do you believe there's a plan, as some allege, to undermine the work of your office, the authority of your office, the independence of your office today?
All I know is that the President is very supportive of the office. I haven't had any reason to believe that the President, as the executive, is not...
But yet this bill has gone through.
Well, President, I suppose, is being advised, but I'm sure, as my view is that he is very supportive of the office.
If you could talk to him now, what are those things you would tell him that you need? We know he's out of the country at the moment, but what are those things that would happen for you to say that your office is well-oiled, well-machined, you know, in terms of even giving the funds, because you've talked about funds to enable you to adequately audit national and county governments effectively?
If I were to say, I would just simply approve or assent to the bill which had gone through the public participation, which had gone through mediation by both houses. That bill is, if we can assent to it, that would be a big step forward.
All right. I want us to address some of the other issues that have been raised in the wake of the report, and I'm sure you've heard these being raised with you. It's obviously a political question, but one would like to put to you anyway. You've heard of the allegations that you are a Raila Odinga man and that you are carrying out his will and his intentions in terms of criticizing the government or painting it in a bad light. Mr. Oko, are you a Raila mole or person? Are you aligned to him politically?
Constitutionally, the oath which I took does not allow me to align to any political party. My offices are apolitical. So that's the answer. I cannot align with any political party. I'm not. Otherwise, I would be not in line with the Constitution. I'm not supposed to play politics. I'm not supposed to go to Harambes and so forth. So it is there. It is there. There is no question. And I don't know how what I have done to show the others that I'm aligned to Raila or somebody else.
Okay. All right. Others go as far as questioning your moral authority, that your name was in the list of shame that was presented by the president to Parliament, talking about money you allegedly, because the matter is supposed to be under investigation, that you allegedly defrauded the World Bank of 500 million. There's also the allegation that the hiring process system in your office is heavily skewed towards people from one ethnic community, your ethnic community. That is what is being said. Would you like to react to this today?
Oh, the allegations were allegations, but I think the allegations, they put Office of the Auditor General and then they put my name. So it
because
is
you're the holder of the office.
I'm the holder of the office, so that's why I'm there. Now, the hiring is something which we do openly. We are now actually in the process of hiring. We advertised. We have the HR department which have really boosted up, which does all the shortlisting, all the processes you want, which then does the interviews. And in fact, we actually even have aptitude tests, which we do with, like in this case, we bring in private firms, or sometimes in this case, we are bringing in UNES, which is the University of Nairobi, to come and help us.
Yes.
And after that, we then select, and selections are done on the basis of what the Constitution requires, that you balance, you take into account the diversities. So that's what we go through. Now, I don't think that that process, I can, overhaul that process or overrun that process to say I'm going to introduce, I don't know, people from one region only.
Do you believe you have the moral authority to carry out your mandate? Or do you think it is a smear campaign?
I'm not touched with that, because I think my conscience is very clear of the work I'm doing.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Speaking with the Auditor General of the country on that report and the reactions after that. We're taking a short break. We'll be right back. Keep your comments coming in, and we will continue sampling them. We have just about 2 or 3 questions as we conclude with the Auditor General, but stay with us. We'll be right back. Back with the Auditor General of the country, Mr. Edward Oko, on that report that was released for the last financial year, 2013-2014, with our final moments and final questions. Before we let you go, what are your thoughts on the IFMIS accounting system in the government? There's been claims that, there's loopholes. There was supposed to be this silver bullet in terms of accounting, and we've heard of the issues within the devolution ministry, which we know are under investigation, so won't get into that. But just your overall thoughts on that. Is that going to be able to help us, seal all of these loopholes? Do you see any challenges in the IFMIS system that need to be addressed to help us get towards 100% accountability?
I think the country is on the right path on having an integrated financial system, and that's IFMIS, because to the extent that everything is now online, then it is a control in itself. It basically stops a lot of tampering. So that's good. I mean, all the government financial transactions are through IFMIS. Budget to pay, we're now having e-procurement going on. So as a country, we are moving forward with the IFMIS. But where we find a disconnect is after the financial year end, the figures, the transactions have gone through IFMIS throughout the year, which is okay, controlled by Treasury. Come at the end of the year, there's a delink in reporting. somehow. So IFMIS, I think we need to look at it, to what extent is it actually responding to what you'd call the financial reporting aspects. And the financial reporting aspect, actually, from the accountant's point of view, does IFMIS then give us a complete, what you call a trial balance, a balance of credits and debits, which allows the audits to be undertaken, or the ministries to prepare their accounts instantaneously, with the little trickling by manual trickling. That, I think, is not, that loose end still has to be tightened.
Okay, where do we go from here, Bonauko? Because for those that don't understand, this now is in the hands of the Parliamentary Accounts Committee in the House. What next after your report? And because we've already had a number of discussions outside of Parliament, which is outside of the process, with responses to your report, some would say not in the right context, which is to Parliament. So could you tell us what next, now that your report is out?
What next? My report was presented to Parliament. Parliament, I believe, now presented it to the Public Accounts Committee, and it is there where we begin the what we call the second cycle of accountability. So the Public Accounts Committee will then go through the tooth comb through my report and summon those involved, the accounting officers and others, to come and respond to the queries. Now, people talk of us not taking their explanations into account. Some of the explanations we could not take into account because they were not adding any new issue. But those explanations can still go to PSC. In other words, they still have another chance to exonerate or to justify. My point of concern is, why is it that those documents were not available during the time when it should have been? Because when it comes 9 months after, we don't actually audit them. So even as they resolve them, we cannot audit. So we don't know whether those are proper justification.
Okay, all right, and I think we'll leave it at that for now. The Auditor General still raising his concerns over why some of those receipts came 9 months after the fact. Of course, that is now the next step. The Auditor General himself will be going before the Parliamentary Accounts Committee, as well as all those others who have issues and queries to raise. But your feedback is coming up in just a while on Checkpoint. John Alanamo wraps it up now with What's the Point?
Definitely one interesting discussion that should continue to keep going if we're to understand how public financial management in this country works. Questions to the Auditor General as well as questions about auditing the Auditor General should be asked. But the question here is, can these two discussions happen at the same time? We discuss what the Auditor General's office has produced in terms of the money that cannot be accounted for, the 67 billion shillings worth of taxpayers' money. Interesting to note that that's the figure that we pointed out as being the balance of trade between Kenya and Uganda earlier on in this bulletin, just to give you some context on how much money that is. So, can we have this discussion about what is going on with respect to accounting for it, and also have the discussion about the alleged impropriety of the Auditor General's office with respect to perhaps past engagements that it's had with, we've seen allegations about the World Bank, allegations about what's happening in the county. And the question then is asked, though, are the complaints about the Auditor General arising from the fact that some people may be uncomfortable with the fact that some uncomfortable truths are being exposed? Or the opposite of this would be, is it the squeaky hinge that is looking to get greased? Those are questions that we're all asking ourselves at this time. But the second question here should be, what are the issues with accounting in ministries? Why is it, perhaps, and this is also just a rider to the first, why is it that ministries are having such a difficult time to account for resources that have been given? As the Auditor General said, this is a line of credit that the Kenyan public has given to them, and therefore there must be fidelity in terms of accounting for it, as much fidelity as there is to asking for the money in the first place. We often hear that ministries are complaining that they don't have enough money to spend on things that they'd want to be able to implement the plans that they have. Where is the fidelity to accounting for this money so that these conversations do not happen in the first place? Finally, we've spoken about IFMIS before on KTN and in different fora, in different media houses, with respect to what it could change with respect to public financial management. Is this happening at the county level? Is it happening at the ministry level? So that accounting is instantaneous. So that this kind of discussion would be more forensic than it is political at this point, and hinged upon the character of an Auditor General, the persona of the Auditor General, and his sins or not thereof. Why is it that we can't get forensics and technology to help us resolve this issue and have people who have fidelity to accounting for the money that they've been given to spend, use technology to our advantage so that we do not politicize the issue of public finance management? And that, this evening, is a point. Alright, before we go to the break, some other stories that we've been following for you. 3 people died and 11 others were injured and left seriously injured with respect to that after worshippers of the African Israel Nineveh Church turned against each other in Hamisi, Vihiga County today. The wrangles in the church have been long-standing, and the root cause being a family dispute that has plagued the church for the past several years. The house belonging to the church's Archbishop John Mweresa Kivuli was reduced to ashes and property worth thousands of shillings destroyed in the process.
Dying smoke, charred remains is all that's left of the house of the Archbishop of the African Israel Nineveh Church in Hamisi, Vihiga, John Mweresa Kivuli II. Sunday, just before midday, chaos broke out at the church. One group of worshippers had gathered to pray inside, and another group was outside the church, and others were in the Archbishop's house. The Archbishop wasn't there. According to other members of the opposing faction in the church, Mweresa allegedly hired goons from Kisumu who kept vigil at his home, and when the other faction came to the church to take over power, they attacked them. The said hooligans, who were armed with stones, attacked the members of the splinter group, and unfortunately they were overpowered and the members broke into the church and the home, destroying property.
Wanapigana kwa sababu wanataka uongozi ambaye sio kulingana katiba ya Israeli hairuhusu. Sasa wanataka uongozi wa lazima.
When the fracas broke out in the church, those in the splinter group made way for the Archbishop's house. They locked the 10 who were there in and set the house on fire. Others in the compound had to run for safety. Police rescued them and had the fire put out. However, 2 of the goons were stoned to death. Church members claimed those goons, who they stoned to death, were allegedly hired to keep the splinter group opposed to the bishop away. One, whose identity is not confirmed, died later this evening, bringing the number to 3. Others were seriously injured, and 11 were rushed to the Vihiga hospital, including the Archbishop's wife.
Walitaka ukuja waithinisha katiba yao, na Mweresa na aliwaambia wa postpone, yeye mwenyewe akuweko wakae chini waone vile wanaweza kufanya, na wakakuja by force.
The African Israel Nineveh Church is an independent church that found its roots in Kenya in 1974. The Kivuli family has been at the helm of the church since its establishment. Archbishop Mweresa took over the church in 1983 from his father, and there have been consistent wrangles, allegedly led by his mother Safina Mweresa, said to be after his ousting. The church has experienced wars amongst its followers for the better part of last year, with Mweresa claiming that the splinter group had forged the constitution to forcefully remove him from office. The counter-accusations in the church led to its split earlier on in the year, where they accused Mweresa for having declared himself a live archbishop, something they want changed and have the church to hold democratic elections. In December last year, the High Court ordered splinter groups in the church to make fresh applications in their case over the control of the church.
Hawa viongozi wawili hawa wa kanisa ni Kivuli na yule mwingine, lazima tuwaite kule tuelezee vizuri haya mambo.
As the flag of the Church of Israel or the Church of Nineveh continues to fly, many questions are being raised. What will be the fate of the church after such an incident? Will the worshippers be the same again? Dorcas Wangira, KTN News, Africa Israel Nineveh Church, Vihiga County.
So we have a structure. No, you are wrong. You are wrong.
We're running out of time, and I really need to conclude our conversation.
Excuse. It was addressed to. But I read. Of course, but I read. So why are we debating? Why then I? Don't come to a function that I have organized and heckle me. Heckling is a fundamental right, given by the state. No, it's not your time, it's KTN time. We are in national television that's being watched by everybody else.
Now, claims of widespread doping trends in athletics don't seem to be going away, and in a new development, British newspaper The Sunday Times claimed leak files suggest that winners of 7 of the last 12 London marathons had quote-unquote suspicious blood scores, adding that other marathons should also be under scrutiny.
British newspaper The Sunday Times has again made allegations of doping at the highest level in athletics, calling into question the results of a number of high-profile marathons around the world. The claims follow last weekend's revelations, which have caused turmoil within the sport just weeks before the World Athletics Championships start in Beijing on August 22nd. This Sunday, The Sunday Times claimed the London Marathon was won 7 times in 12 years by athletes who have recorded suspicious blood scores that indicate they could have doped. It again based its allegations on the leaked database. The paper also claimed that the data reveals the extent of suspected. The paper also claimed that the data reveals the extent of suspected cheating by elite runners in the 6 international famous city marathons, namely Boston, Chicago, New York, Tokyo and Berlin, adding that they all need to be investigated. The Sunday Times also alleged that Lilia Shobukova, who won the London Marathon in 2011 but was subsequently banned for doping, recorded extreme blood scores for 9 years before action was finally taken against her. The claims have created a dark cloud ahead of the World Athletics Championships, while its effects have been keenly felt in Kenya, with former London Marathon champion and Olympic silver medalist Wilson Kipsang not shying away from putting in his voice.
Kenya, I think they are not doing much when it comes to maybe creating awareness and making sure that control measures is really done, because you find that many of the athletes are not fully aware of what these drugs are or how to avoid. So I think much needs to be done.
The World Athletics Championships kick off on the 22nd and come to an end on the 30th of August in Beijing, China. Lin Washira, KTN.
Top fry Nakuru are the Dala Sevens champions after narrowly edging out last weekend's Christie Sevens winners Kenya Harlequins 15-14 in the main cup quarter-finals in Kisumu. And elsewhere, the 36th edition of the Kekoso Games entered day 2 in Machakos.
With defending Dala Sevens champions KCB failing to make it to the main cup finals, contention for the second leg of the National Sevens Series title was between Nakuru RFC and last weekend's Christie Sevens winners Kenya Harlequins, who were hoping for a second consecutive win. Nakuru drew the first blood, taking a 5-0 lead before a second try that saw them assume a 10-0 lead. William Baka put Queens into contention with a try that was successfully converted for a 7-0 lead and soon stretching it to 14-10 before a third try from Wanyore made things 15-14 to give the Nakuru outfit a win. Defending champions KCB settled for plate. The third leg of the National Sevens circuit heads to Mombasa on 22nd and 23rd of this month. Elsewhere, the ongoing Kekoso Games in Machakos saw a rain of goals, with Postal Corporation breaking its 12-goal record to beat Kenya Maritime Authority 16-0. In netball, Postal Corporation of Kenya beat Kenya Civil Aviation Authority 44-38, while Ministry of Information, Communications and Technology smashed Kenya Ports Authority 46-23. In volleyball, Postal Corporation of Kenya beat Ministry of Information and Communication 3-2, while Kenya Civil Aviation Authority received a beating from Postal Corporation. Meanwhile, Nairobi Provincial League side Uprising FC stand Shofco United 2-1 in the ongoing Nairobi Champions Cup tournament to advance to the last of 16 at the Nairobi Technical Institute grounds. Uprising were first on the scorecard in the 5th minute through a penalty awarded after Shofco defender Kelvin Omondi brought down Uprising striker Kennedy Onyango inside the box. Ambrose Ayoyi leveled for Shofco in the 21st minute before Juma Jamal fired home in the 23rd minute to restore the advantage and win to Uprising. Dortmund, Kenafric and Naivas all won their matches.
Tunaona pia ni knockout after game kuna mapena. Last game tulienda penalty. So pia tumekuwa tukikuja sasa hataki mambo hiyo ya penalty juu ni 50-50.
Kwa tunajua tunakuja kucheza na team tough kwa sababu pali kama Kibira kuna talents nyingi. So tunakuja kucheza na watu wana talent.
The competition enters the round of 16 next weekend. Lynn Washira, KTN.
Okay, so let's take a look at your thoughts tonight on the conversation on Checkpoint. Anne McCreed says, I like the clarity of the Auditor General, very professional and not willing to be drawn into politics. We need more people like him. Excellent. This is Amosh says, Kenya is doomed. Names play bigger roles than accountability. And at Will Sharaban, you say, how come anytime an institution makes an expose on corruption, we immediately find its office bearers corrupt too?
Very interesting. Someone else also echoes those statements. James Kinywa Moredi says, accountability is supreme regardless of the office bearer. Support the Auditor General and respond factually to his report. Another Kenyan here on Twitter says, and that's his Twitter handle. I'm not just saying he's another Kenyan.
Okay.
His Twitter handle is another Kenyan. We must push for government accountability first. Before that, any allegations against the AG are null and void. Can we have this discussion about the 67 billion, or are we going to discuss the personality of not the Attorney, the Auditor General?
Right.
And what
those are two
done.
conversations that are coming up at the same time. And some questioning the timing, others saying he doesn't have the moral authority to do that, to question, the spending in government when he himself is under investigation. So we wait and see what happens at the National Assembly.
Both conversations, in my view, are valid, but perhaps having separate tracks for both of them so that we can also get value for money would be important as Kenyans, so we can get the answers that we want. Would the answers about the Auditor General assuage our questions or our curiosity about what's happening with our money? That's perhaps a question we need to be asking ourselves as well.
That's true. And of course, now the next process is in Parliament, where all of them ideally should have gone to give their responses to. The chair of the Parliamentary Accounts Committee, of course, will now be the man on the spot as his committee now takes this process forward. And then they're the ones that make the recommendations as to what happens next. The Auditor General simply says, I don't have a receipt for this 100 bob that was spent. And then the Parliament says, well, we think this money was lost or misappropriated, and we recommend action A, B to Z. Thanks for your comments tonight on Checkpoint. We appreciate that, and we thank you for watching the Bulletin. Have a great week ahead. My name is Yvonne Okwara Matole.
My name is John Allen, and we remember that address by Uhuru Kenyatta to the Ugandan Parliament will be on from about 10 o'clock tomorrow. Keep it KTN News across East Africa and get the whole story. Good night.